The morning sun cast long shadows across the busy downtown street as James finished his daily run through the park. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his running shoes squeaked slightly against the polished marble floor as he pushed through the heavy glass doors of Central City Bank. He had been putting off this banking visit for weeks, but today felt like the right time to finally expand his business operations. At 42 years old, James had built his technology company from nothing more than a laptop in his garage. Now, 5 years later, his software development firm employed over 200 people and had contracts with major corporations across the country. But looking at him now in his gray jogging shorts and slightly wrinkled t-shirt, most people would never guess he was anything more than another customer stopping by after a morning workout. The bank lobby buzzed with typical Monday morning activity. Business people in crisp suits hurried past, checking their phones and clutching leather briefcases. Elderly customers sat in the waiting area, patiently holding numbered tickets. The familiar sounds of clicking keyboards and muffled conversations created a steady background hum that James had grown accustomed to during his previous visits to various bank branches over the years. He approached the customer service desk where a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair sat behind a computer screen. Her name tag read Ashley in bold letters, and she looked up at him with what could only be described as barely concealed annoyance. Her eyes quickly scanned him from head to toe, taking in his casual athletic wear and the small towel draped around his neck. "Can I help you?" Ashley asked, her tone suggesting she would rather be doing almost anything else. She didn't make eye contact, instead focusing on her computer screen as if it contained the most fascinating information in the world. James smiled politely, despite the cool reception. He had learned long ago that kindness often worked better than confrontation, especially in situations like this. "Good morning. I was hoping to speak with someone about expanding my business banking services. I have some significant transactions coming up and wanted to discuss investment options." Ashley's fingers paused over her keyboard. She looked up at him again, this time with what appeared to be confusion mixed with skepticism. "Investment options?" she repeated slowly, as if the words didn't quite make sense coming from someone dressed like James. "Yes, that's right. My company is looking to diversify our financial portfolio, and we're considering some real estate investments as well. I figured it would be best to speak directly with a business banking specialist." The young teller glanced around the lobby, then back at James. Well, for basic banking services, you can just take a number and wait in the general queue over there." She pointed toward a row of chairs where several customers sat waiting. "Someone will be with you eventually." James maintained his patient smile, though he could feel a familiar tension building in his shoulders. "I appreciate that, but I'm not here for basic services. I need to discuss some fairly complex financial arrangements. Could I speak with a business banker or perhaps a manager?" Ashley's expression shifted from confusion to what looked like mild irritation. She picked up her phone and pressed a few buttons, speaking in a low voice to whoever answered on the other end. James couldn't make out the exact words, but he caught phrases like "customer insisting" and "wants to speak to management." After hanging up, Ashley turned back to him with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Someone will be right with you," she said curtly, then immediately turned her attention back to her computer screen, effectively dismissing him. James stepped back from the counter and found a spot near the wall where he could wait without blocking other customers. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his emails, noting several messages from his chief financial officer about the upcoming expansion plans. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was being treated like an inconvenience at the very bank where his company held multiple seven-figure accounts. A few minutes later, a woman in her 50s approached him. She wore a navy blue blazer and had the confident stride of someone who had worked in banking for many years. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried herself with the authority of someone used to being in charge. "I'm Janet Morrison, the assistant branch manager," she said, extending her hand. "I understand you wanted to speak with someone about business banking?" James shook her hand and smiled. "Yes, thank you for taking the time. I know how busy everyone gets on Monday mornings. I'm James, and I own a technology company here in the city. We're looking to expand our banking relationship and explore some investment opportunities." Janet nodded, but James noticed her eyes doing the same quick assessment that Ashley had performed earlier. She took in his workout clothes, his slightly disheveled appearance from the morning run, and something in her expression seemed to shift. "Of course," she said, though her tone had cooled noticeably. "And what kind of amounts are we talking about here?" "I want to make sure I can direct you to the right services for your needs." James had encountered this line of questioning before at other institutions. He knew that his appearance often led people to make assumptions about his financial situation. Rather than take offense, he had learned to be direct and professional in his responses. "We're looking at moving several $1,000,000 for various investment purposes," he said matter-of-factly. "My CFO and I have been researching real estate opportunities, and we want to make sure we have the right banking partnership to support those transactions." Janet's eyebrows rose slightly, and James saw her exchange a quick glance with Ashley, who had been listening from her desk nearby. There was something in that look that made James's stomach tighten slightly, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. "Several million," Janet repeated slowly, her voice carrying a note of skepticism that she didn't bother to hide. "And this is for your technology company?" "That's correct," James replied, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the increasingly uncomfortable direction of the conversation. "We've had a very successful few years, and we're ready to take the next step in our growth strategy." Janet nodded again, but James could see the doubt written clearly across her face. She looked him up and down once more, taking in every detail of his appearance as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite fit together in her mind. The lobby continued to bustle around them, but James felt as though he and Janet were standing in their own bubble of tension. Other customers moved past them, conducting their business efficiently and without incident. He wondered how many of them had ever been subjected to this level of scrutiny simply for walking through the bank's front doors. "Well," Janet said finally, "let me see what I can do to help you." Janet led James to a small seating area near the back of the lobby, away from the main customer flow. The chairs were comfortable enough, but James couldn't shake the feeling that he was being moved away from the more prominent areas of the bank. Janet settled into her chair and pulled out a tablet, her fingers dancing across the screen as she pulled up what appeared to be a standard questionnaire. "So, let's start with some basic information," Janet said, her voice taking on the practiced tone of someone who had conducted thousands of these interviews. "Can I see some identification, please?" James reached into his small running pouch and pulled out his driver's license and business credit card. Janet examined both documents carefully, holding them up to the light and comparing the photo to James's face with an intensity that seemed excessive for a routine banking inquiry. "James Crawford," she read aloud, as if confirming the name to herself. "And this business card is for Crawford Technologies?" "That's right," James confirmed. "We specialize in custom software development for enterprise clients. We've been operating for about 5 years now." Janet made notes on her tablet, occasionally glancing up at James with an expression that he was beginning to recognize as persistent skepticism. "And you mentioned wanting to move several $1,000,000. Can you tell me more about the source of these funds?" The question itself wasn't unreasonable. Banks had legal obligations to verify the legitimacy of large transactions, but something in Janet's tone suggested this was more than routine due diligence. James had been through similar processes at other financial institutions, and this felt different somehow. "The funds come from our business operations," James explained patiently. "We have contracts with several Fortune 500 companies, and we've been profitable for the past 3 years. I can provide our audited financial statements if needed." "Fortune 500 companies," Janet repeated, writing something on her tablet. "And they pay you directly?" James felt his patience beginning to wear thin, but he maintained his professional composure. "Yes, that's how business contracts typically work. We provide services, they pay our invoices. I can provide references if you'd like to verify our client relationships." Janet looked up from her tablet, and James saw something in her expression that made his heart sink. It was a look he had encountered before in his life, though not often in professional settings like this one. It was the look of someone who had already made up their mind about him before he had even spoken a word. "Mr. Crawford," Janet said slowly, "I have to be honest with you. The amounts you're discussing are quite substantial, and this bank serves a very particular clientele. Are you sure you wouldn't be more comfortable working with a branch that's more familiar with your type of business?" The words hung in the air between them like a heavy fog. James felt his chest tighten as the implications of Janet's suggestion became clear. She wasn't questioning his business credentials or his financial capacity. She was questioning whether he belonged there at all. "My type of business?" James asked quietly, giving Janet a chance to clarify what she meant. Janet seemed to realize she had ventured into dangerous territory, but instead of backing down, she doubled down on her position. "Well, smaller technology startups, individual contractors, that sort of thing. We primarily work with established corporations and high-net-worth individuals. Perhaps one of our branches in a different part of the city would be better equipped to handle your particular needs." James knew exactly what Janet was suggesting. Even though she was being careful not to say it directly, she was telling him that he should take his business to a branch in a neighborhood where she felt he would be more appropriately placed. The assumption underlying her words was as clear as it was insulting. "I see," James said, his voice remaining steady despite the anger building inside him. "And what makes you think I wouldn't qualify as a high-net-worth individual?" Janet glanced around the lobby nervously, as if suddenly aware that their conversation might be overheard. "It's not about qualifying," she said quickly. "It's about finding the right fit. You mentioned you just finished exercising, and I'm sure you have other things to do today. I'm simply trying to save you some time." James leaned back in his chair, studying Janet's face. In her expression, he could see years of assumptions and prejudices that had probably gone unchallenged for most of her career. She genuinely seemed to believe that she was doing him a favor by directing him elsewhere. "Ms. Morrison," James said carefully, "I appreciate your concern for my time, but I specifically chose this branch because I've heard good things about your business banking services. I'm not interested in going somewhere else. I'm interested in discussing my banking needs with someone who can help me here, today." Janet's tablet screen dimmed as she stopped taking notes. She looked at James with what appeared to be growing frustration, as if he was being deliberately difficult by not accepting her helpful suggestion. "Mr. Crawford, I think there might be some confusion about the services we offer here. When you say several $1,000,000, are you perhaps thinking about this in terms of your company's total revenue over several years? Because the investment minimums we work with for our private banking services are quite substantial." James felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. Janet was now openly suggesting that he was confused about basic financial concepts, as if he didn't understand the difference between total revenue and available capital. "I'm talking about liquid assets," James said firmly. "Money that's currently sitting in various accounts that I want to consolidate and invest more strategically." "I understand the difference between revenue and available capital, Ms. Morrison." Janet set her tablet down on the small table between them and folded her hands in her lap. Her body language suggested that she was preparing to end this conversation, one way or another. "Mr. Crawford, I've been working in banking for over 15 years, and I've learned to recognize when someone might be overestimating their financial position. It happens more often than you might think. People see numbers on paper and assume they represent money that's actually available for investment." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable now. James realized that no amount of explanation or documentation was going to change Janet's mind about who she thought he was and what she believed he was capable of financially. "I think I'd like to speak with the branch manager," James said quietly. "Is he or she available today?" Janet's expression hardened. "Mr. Crawford, I am perfectly capable of handling your banking needs. But if you're going to continue insisting on amounts and services that are clearly beyond what you're actually looking for, then I'm afraid this conversation isn't going to be productive for either of us." The tone of dismissal in her voice was final. James could see that Janet had moved from skepticism to active hostility. In her mind, he had transformed from a potential customer into a problem that needed to be managed and ultimately removed. "I'm not insisting on anything unreasonable," James replied. "I'm simply asking to speak with someone about legitimate banking services. If you can't help me, then perhaps someone else can." Janet stood up abruptly, gathering her tablet and straightening her blazer. "Mr. Crawford, I think it would be best if you reconsidered what you're actually looking for today. Perhaps you could start with opening a basic checking account and work your way up from there." The suggestion was so insulting that James almost laughed. Here he was, a successful business owner trying to move millions of dollars in investments, being told to start with a basic checking account as if he was a college student opening his first bank account. But James didn't laugh. Instead, he stood up as well, maintaining his dignity despite the humiliating conversation he had just endured. He looked Janet in the eye and said simply, "I think I'll wait to speak with the manager." Janet's jaw tightened as she looked down at James, who remained seated calmly despite her obvious attempt to end their meeting. The bustling lobby continued around them, but James could sense that their conversation was beginning to draw attention from other customers and staff members nearby. "Mr. Crawford," Janet said, her voice taking on a sharper edge, "I've already explained that I can handle any banking needs you might have. There's really no need to bother the branch manager with this." James remained in his chair, his hands folded quietly in his lap. "I understand your position, Ms. Morrison, but I would still like to speak with the manager. Is that not something customers are allowed to request?" The question was simple and reasonable, but Janet's reaction suggested that James had just made an unreasonable demand. She glanced around the lobby again, and James noticed that several other bank employees had begun to take notice of their conversation. "Of course, customers can request to speak with management," Janet said stiffly, "but typically that's for situations involving actual problems or significant banking relationships. The manager's time is quite valuable, and I'm sure you can understand that we need to prioritize appropriately." James felt a familiar weight settle in his stomach. He had encountered this type of gatekeeping before, though usually not quite so blatantly. The message was clear. Janet didn't believe he was important enough to warrant the manager's attention. "I believe my request is reasonable," James said simply. "I'm here to discuss a significant business relationship with this bank. If you're unable to help me with that, then speaking with the manager seems like the logical next step." Janet's face flushed slightly, and James could see that his calm persistence was beginning to frustrate her. She looked around the lobby once more, then walked a few steps away and pulled out her phone. James could hear her speaking in low, urgent tones, though he couldn't make out the specific words. While Janet was on her phone, James noticed that Ashley, the young teller from earlier, kept glancing in their direction. She appeared to be whispering with another teller, both of them looking toward James with expressions of curiosity and concern. Janet returned after a few minutes, her phone call apparently complete. "I've spoken with the security supervisor," she announced, as if this was a natural next step in their conversation. "He's going to come over and help resolve this situation." James felt his eyebrows rise in surprise. "Security? I'm not sure why security would be necessary. I'm simply waiting to speak with the manager about banking services." "Mr. Crawford," Janet said, her voice taking on what she probably thought was a patient, explanatory tone. "You've been here for quite a while now, making demands and refusing to accept the help that's being offered to you. This kind of behavior can be disruptive to our other customers." James looked around the lobby. The other customers appeared to be going about their business normally. No one seemed disrupted by anything other than Janet's increasingly loud voice and obvious agitation. "I haven't made any demands," James said quietly. "I've simply asked to speak with the manager about banking services." "I'm not sure how that constitutes disruptive behavior." Before Janet could respond, a large man in a dark uniform approached their seating area. The security guard looked to be in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of build that suggested he had probably been in law enforcement at some point in his career. His name tag identified him as Officer Thompson. "Good morning," Thompson said, addressing both James and Janet. "I understand there's some kind of issue here." Janet immediately launched into what sounded like a prepared explanation. "Officer Thompson, this gentleman has been here for over 30 minutes, refusing to accept assistance and demanding to speak with the manager. I've tried to help him with his banking needs, but he's being quite difficult." James felt a surge of disbelief at Janet's characterization of their conversation. 30 minutes was an exaggeration. It had been perhaps 15 minutes since he first approached Ashley's desk, and he certainly hadn't been demanding anything or refusing assistance. "I see," Thompson said, turning to look at James. "And what seems to be the problem, sir?" James took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure despite the surreal turn the morning had taken. "There's no problem, officer. I came in to discuss expanding my business banking relationship, and I've asked to speak with the branch manager." "That's all?" Thompson nodded, his expression neutral and professional. "And why do you need to speak with the manager specifically?" Before James could answer, Janet jumped in again. "He's claiming he wants to move millions of dollars, which is clearly unrealistic given his situation. I've tried to direct him to more appropriate services, but he won't listen to reason. James felt his patience finally beginning to fray. "My situation?" he asked, looking directly at Janet. "What exactly do you know about my situation, Ms. Morrison?" The question hung in the air, and James could see that Janet realized she had ventured into territory that could get her into serious trouble. Her face reddened, but instead of backing down, she seemed to dig in deeper. "I've been in banking long enough to recognize when someone is overestimating their financial capacity," she said defensively. "I'm trying to save everyone time and embarrassment." Officer Thompson looked between James and Janet, and James could see that the security guard was beginning to sense that something wasn't quite right about this situation. Thompson had probably dealt with actual disruptive customers before, and James clearly didn't fit that profile. "Sir," Thompson said to James, "have you provided identification and explained what you need?" "Yes, I have," James replied. "I've shown my driver's license and business credit card, and I've explained that I want to discuss business banking services and investment options for my technology company." Thompson turned to Janet. "And why can't he speak with the manager?" Janet's explanation became increasingly flustered. "Well, the manager is very busy, and this gentleman's requests are quite unrealistic. He's dressed inappropriately for our clientele, and his demands don't match his apparent circumstances." The words came out in a rush, and as soon as Janet finished speaking, James could see that she realized she had said too much. Officer Thompson's expression shifted from neutral professionalism to something that looked like concern. "Dressed inappropriately?" Thompson repeated slowly. He looked at James, taking in his clean workout clothes and athletic shoes. "Sir, were you planning to conduct business dressed like that?" James nodded. "I was out for my morning run and decided to stop in. I know it's not formal business attire, but I didn't think that would prevent me from speaking with someone about banking services." Thompson looked back at Janet, and James could see that the security officer was beginning to understand the real nature of the situation. "Ma'am, is there a dress code for customers who want to speak with management?" Janet's face went from red to pale in a matter of seconds. "Well, no, not exactly. But our private banking clients typically dress in a certain way, and we have to consider the comfort of our other customers." "I see," Thompson said quietly. He looked around the lobby, where other customers were indeed watching the scene unfold, but they seemed more curious about why a security guard was involved than concerned about James's presence. James could see that Officer Thompson was a professional who understood his job was to maintain order and safety, not to enforce Janet's personal biases about who belonged in the bank. The security guard's expression had shifted from mild concern to something that looked like embarrassment about being called into this situation at all. "Ms. Morrison," Thompson said carefully, "is this gentleman threatening anyone or causing any actual disturbance?" "Well, no, but has he raised his voice or behaved inappropriately in any way?" "Not exactly, but he's being very persistent." Thompson nodded slowly, and James could see that the security guard had reached his own conclusions about what was really happening here. The tension in the lobby was thick enough to cut with a knife when the bank's front doors opened with their familiar electronic chime. James looked up to see a tall, well-dressed man in his 50s entering with the confident stride of someone who clearly belonged there. The newcomer wore an expensive charcoal gray suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Officer Thompson noticed the man's arrival as well and seemed to straighten up slightly. "That's Mr. Chen, the regional manager," he said quietly to both James and Janet. "He's here for his monthly branch inspection." James felt a spark of hope. Perhaps now he could finally get past Janet's gatekeeping and have a reasonable conversation about his banking needs. He watched as the well-dressed man paused near the entrance, scanning the lobby with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to evaluating business operations. Mr. Chen's gaze swept across the lobby and stopped when he saw the unusual scene near the back seating area. A security guard, an agitated assistant manager, and a customer in workout clothes were clearly not the typical Monday morning tableau he expected to encounter during his inspection. But then something unexpected happened. Mr. Chen's expression changed from mild curiosity to what looked like recognition, followed immediately by concern, and then something that resembled panic. He started walking quickly across the lobby, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor with increasing urgency. "Mr. Crawford," Mr. Chen called out as he approached, his voice carrying clearly across the lobby. I'm so sorry to keep you waiting. I had no idea you were here. James felt a wave of relief wash over him as Mr. Chen approached with an outstretched hand and a genuinely apologetic smile. Finally, someone who recognized him and understood why he was there. Janet, meanwhile, looked completely bewildered. She glanced back and forth between James and Mr. Chen, as if trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly become impossibly complex. Officer Thompson stepped back slightly, sensing that his services were no longer needed but remaining close enough to observe what was clearly an important interaction. "Mr. Chen," James said, standing and shaking the regional manager's hand. "Good to see you again. I was hoping to discuss some expansion opportunities for my accounts here, but I seem to have run into a bit of a communication issue with your staff." Mr. Chen's smile faltered as he looked around at the scene before him. His eyes took in Officer Thompson's presence, Janet's flushed and confused expression, and the obvious tension that hung in the air like smoke. "A communication issue?" Mr. Chen repeated carefully. "I'm sure whatever it is, we can resolve it immediately. You know how much we value your business relationship with our institution." James could see Janet's face going through a series of expressions as she processed what she was hearing. Confusion gave way to dawning realization, which was quickly followed by what looked like mounting horror. "I'm sorry," Janet interrupted, her voice smaller than it had been all morning. "But how exactly do you two know each other?" Mr. Chen turned to look at Janet with surprise, as if he couldn't quite believe the question. "Ms. Morrison, surely you recognize Mr. Crawford. His company holds several of our largest business accounts. Crawford Technologies has been one of our most valued clients for the past 2 years. The color drained completely from Janet's face as the implications of what Mr. Chen was saying began to sink in. James could see her mind racing, probably replaying every word of their conversation and every assumption she had made about his financial capacity and business credentials. I had no idea," Janet stammered. "He never mentioned. He was dressed so casually and he seemed what exactly?" Mr. Chen asked, his tone taking on an edge that suggested his friendly demeanor was rapidly giving way to something much more serious. Officer Thompson, who had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding, quietly excused himself and moved away from the group. James could see that the security guard had realized he had been called into a situation that had nothing to do with actual security concerns. "Mr. Chen," James said diplomatically, "I think there may have been some misunderstandings about what I was looking for today. I came in hoping to discuss some investment opportunities and possibly consolidate some of our accounts. But Ms. Morrison seemed to feel that this branch wasn't the right fit for my needs." Mr. Chen's expression darkened as he turned back to Janet. "Not the right fit? Ms. Morrison, can you explain to me why you would tell one of our most important clients that our branch isn't the right fit for his needs?" Janet looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Sir, he was dressed so informally, and when he mentioned the amounts he was talking about, I thought he might be confused about our services." "You thought he was confused?" Mr. Chen repeated slowly, his voice carrying a dangerous calm. "About our services. The services that his company has been successfully using for 2 years." James could see other bank employees beginning to take notice of the conversation. Ashley, the young teller who had first dismissed him, was watching from her desk with wide eyes. Word was clearly spreading through the staff that something significant was happening. "Mr. Crawford," Mr. Chen said, turning back to James with an expression of deep embarrassment, "I cannot begin to apologize enough for this experience. This is absolutely not representative of how we treat our valued clients, and I want to assure you that we will address this situation immediately and thoroughly." James nodded, appreciating the apology but still processing the morning's events. "I understand that mistakes happen, Mr. Chen, but I have to say this has been a rather eye-opening experience." Mr. Chen pulled out his phone and quickly dialed a number. "Patricia, I need you to cancel my next 2 appointments and clear my calendar for the rest of the morning. We have a situation here that requires my immediate attention." He paused, listening to the response. "No, everything's fine, but I need to spend some time with one of our most important clients." After ending the call, Mr. Chen turned back to the group. "Mr. Crawford, would you be willing to give me an opportunity to personally handle your banking needs today? I promise you'll receive the level of service that you should have received from the moment you walked through our doors." James looked at Janet, who appeared to be in a state of shock, then back at Mr. Chen. "I appreciate that, Mr. Chen. I think that would be very helpful." "Excellent," Mr. Chen said, then turned to Janet with an expression that was no longer friendly. "Ms. Morrison, I need to speak with you privately after I've finished with Mr. Crawford. Please make sure you're available for the rest of the morning." Janet nodded mutely, clearly understanding that her day had just taken a very serious turn. James could see that she was beginning to comprehend the full magnitude of her mistakes and their potential consequences. As Mr. Chen led James toward the private banking offices, James caught a glimpse of Ashley at her desk, speaking urgently with another teller. The word was spreading quickly through the branch that the casually dressed man they had all dismissed was actually one of the bank's most important customers. "Again, Mr. Crawford, I cannot express how sorry I am about this," Mr. Chen said as they walked. "This is not who we are as an institution, and it's certainly not how we treat our valued partners." James nodded, but his mind was already moving beyond the apology to the larger implications of what had just happened. This wasn't just about poor customer service or a communication breakdown. This was about something much deeper and more troubling, and he suspected that Mr. Chen was beginning to realize that as well. The private banking office felt like a different world compared to the tension-filled lobby James had just left behind. Rich mahogany furniture, soft leather chairs, and tasteful artwork created an atmosphere of quiet luxury and professional competence. Mr. Chen closed the door behind them and gestured for James to take a seat in one of the comfortable chairs facing his desk. "Please, make yourself comfortable," Mr. Chen said, moving around to his own chair. "Can I get you some coffee or water? I imagine this morning has been quite stressful." James settled into the chair, appreciating the gesture but still processing everything that had just occurred. "Water would be great, thanks." Mr. Chen pressed a button on his phone and requested refreshments, then leaned back in his chair and studied James's face with genuine concern. "Mr. Crawford, I've been in banking for over 20 years, and I can honestly say that what just happened out there is one of the most unprofessional situations I've ever witnessed. I want you to know that this doesn't represent our values as an institution." James accepted the glass of water that arrived moments later and took a sip before responding. "I appreciate that, Mr. Chen. But I have to be honest with you. This experience has made me question whether this is the right banking relationship for my company moving forward." The words hit Mr. Chen like a physical blow. James could see the regional manager's face pale as he realized that the morning's events might cost the bank one of their most lucrative business relationships. "Mr. Crawford, please," Mr. Chen said urgently. "I understand completely why you would feel that way, but I'm hoping you'll give us an opportunity to make this right. What happened today was the result of individual poor judgment, not institutional policy." James set his water glass on the small table beside his chair and leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Chen, can I ask you something directly? In your experience, would a well-dressed businessman in an expensive suit have been treated the way I was today?" The question hung in the air between them, and James could see that Mr. Chen understood exactly what he was asking. The regional manager's expression became grave as he considered his response carefully. "No," Mr. Chen said quietly. "I don't believe they would have been." James nodded, appreciating the honest answer. "Then we're not just talking about poor customer service or individual poor judgment. We're talking about something more systemic, aren't we?" Mr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the implications of the situation. James could see that the man was genuinely troubled by what had occurred, not just because of the potential business consequences, but because he seemed to understand the deeper issues at play. "You're absolutely right," Mr. Chen finally said, "and that's exactly why this situation requires more than just an apology. It requires real change." Over the next hour, James and Mr. Chen had one of the most frank and productive conversations James had experienced with any business partner. They discussed not only James's immediate banking needs, but also the broader cultural issues that had led to the morning's events. Mr. Chen explained that he would be conducting a comprehensive review of the branch's customer service practices, with particular attention to how staff members were trained to interact with all customers, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. Janet would be suspended pending a full investigation, and all staff members would be required to undergo additional training on customer service and unconscious bias. But more importantly, Mr. Chen committed to implementing systematic changes that would prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. New policies would be put in place to ensure that all customers received consistent professional service. Regular audits would be conducted to monitor compliance, and customer feedback systems would be enhanced to catch problems before they escalated. "Mr. Crawford," Mr. Chen said as their meeting drew to a close,
"I want to ask you for something that I know I don't have the right to request after what happened today."
James raised an eyebrows, curious about what the regional manager was going to say. "I'd like to ask for your help," Mr. Chen continued. "Not just in giving us another chance with your business, but in helping us become better. Your experience today has opened our eyes to problems we didn't even know we had. We need customers like you to hold us accountable and help us create the kind of inclusive environment we should have had all along." James was surprised by the request, but also impressed by Mr. Chen's willingness to acknowledge the bank's shortcomings so directly. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "I'd like you to consider joining our Customer Advisory Board," Mr. Chen explained. "It's a group of our most valued clients who provide feedback on our services and help guide our policies. Your perspective would be invaluable in helping us address these kinds of issues systematically." James thought about the offer for a moment. Part of him wanted to simply take his business elsewhere and be done with the whole situation. But another part of him recognized an opportunity to make a real difference, not just for himself but for other customers who might face similar treatment in the future. "I'll consider it," James said finally. "But I want to see concrete evidence that the changes you're promising actually happen. This can't just be about managing the immediate crisis." "Absolutely," Mr. Chen agreed. "I'll provide you with regular updates on our progress, and I want you to feel free to contact me directly if you ever experience anything like this again." As they concluded their business for the day, James felt cautiously optimistic about the path forward. His immediate banking needs had been addressed efficiently and professionally, and he had secured commitments for the kind of service he should have received from the beginning. But more importantly, he had helped initiate a process of change that could benefit countless other customers in the future. The advisory board position would give him ongoing influence to ensure that the bank's promises of improvement were more than just words. 6 months later, James would attend the grand opening of the bank's new customer service training center, where every employee learned about inclusive service practices and unconscious bias. Janet, after completing her own training and counseling program, had been transferred to a role where she could learn and grow without direct customer contact. The branch had become a model for the entire banking chain, with customer satisfaction scores reaching record highs and employee feedback indicating a much more positive workplace culture. Other customers began sharing stories of consistently professional treatment, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. Ashley, the young teller who had first dismissed James, approached him at the training center opening with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Crawford," she said, "I want to thank you for not just walking away that day. What you helped create here has made me a better person, not just a better employee." James smiled and shook her hand. "We all have opportunities to learn and grow, Ashley. What matters is what we do with those opportunities." As he looked around at the diverse group of employees and customers celebrating the new training center, James reflected on how a morning that had started with frustration and disappointment had ultimately led to positive change for an entire institution. Sometimes, he thought, the most difficult experiences create the greatest opportunities for growth and improvement. The key is finding people who are willing to listen, learn, and commit to doing better. In Mr. Chen and the reformed culture of the bank, James had found exactly that kind of partnership. The morning jog that had led to his fateful bank visit had become a turning point, not just in his business relationship, but in his understanding of how one person's willingness to speak up and work for change could create ripple effects that benefited an entire community. And every time he visited the branch now, dressed in whatever clothes felt comfortable that day, he was greeted with the genuine respect and professional service that every customer deserved from the very beginning.